is Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary with Anthony Rivardo on a Wednesday. Appreciate you joining me one day earlier, Anthony.
Of course, I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to talk about some interesting topics for both of the Jets and the Giants. We know that defense is projected to be the strength for both of these teams, one projected to be a lot stronger than the other. But I'm excited to kind of discuss those strong points and potentially weak points on the Giants end of things as well.
Absolutely. We are going to hop into the episode today. Really excited to get into some defensive line rankings, I think, to start. And I talked about this in today's episode of Just Jets, but the New York Jets have the number one ranked defensive line according to Pro Football Focus. They come in at number one, and that's even after losing John Franklin Myers and Bryce Huff. So my initial reaction to this is not that I don't think it's necessarily deserving. I think the top three, Jets, 49ers, and spoiler, the Eagles, are the top three. I think you could kind of put those three in a tier of their own, and like whatever order you want to put them in is good with me. But honestly, I think on paper, at least, the Jets defensive line might have got worse this offseason. They're still number one in the league.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I feel like for those top three teams that you just mentioned, it's pretty interchangeable. You can kind of just place them how you like them. But for this Jets defensive line, there is a lot of talent there, and there's even untapped potential within the talent. Like, we are talking about guys like Will McDonald, who maybe is a solid player right now, but who knows? Maybe he does step into his own, grow into his own, and take a big step forward this season. And outside of that, there is just a lot of talent all over this Jets defensive line. Even though they lost Bryce Huff, they lost John Franklin Myers, they did bring in Hassan Reddick. So if he plays this season, and if he plays happily under a new contract, especially, he should be a big boost to this unit as well.
Yeah, I mean, when looking at the Jets, I guess really top 8 guys from they would have the projected starters are going to be Hassan Reddick and Jermaine Johnson on the edge, with Quinnen Williams and Javon Kinlaw, inside. And then that second wave on the rotation, Will McDonald, Leaky Fotu. You also have Solomon Thomas and probably Michael Clemens as that 8th guy. So I think that what really helps the Jets is their depth, like having Will McDonald being able to rotate in, I think is going to play a big factor in it. We'll see if some of these maybe younger guys even could take a step up. It's just crazy to me that, like, you look at some of the comparables, like Quentin Jefferson to Javon Kinlaw this year. Like, I think you can make a case that Quentin Jefferson's a better player. And going from Al Woods to into Leaky Fotu, I think, is a little bit of a downgrade, even though Fotu is significantly younger than Al Woods was. But to me, I'm looking at like the Huff and Reddick thing is interesting. I think that, like, I'm willing to even say like that's probably pretty close to a wash. Reddick's been the more productive player over the last 4 years. A lot of Huff is still projection, but the thing that I don't know if scares is the right word, but maybe I'm a little nervous about is the John Franklin Myers loss, because he was probably their best run defending edge and their best like true edge setter. And I don't know if they have that guy to replace him on this roster unless Michael Clemens is taking a big step forward.
Yeah, and that would definitely be the big concern, is the loss of John Franklin Myers. I agree with you. I think that Hassan Reddick coming in kind of offsets the loss of Bryce Huff and is maybe even an upgrade in some respects. Bryce Huff, again, I thought that a lot of the hype around him was projection. I thought that he was great in limited playing time, but we do have to see what he's going to do now that he's joining an Eagles team. And going to be playing probably a larger snap count and maybe being a full-time player rather than a pass rushing player in particular. So I don't think that's the biggest loss, but you're right in the sense that the Jets run defense definitely took a blow in losing John Franklin Myers, and offsetting that is going to be a lot more difficult than offsetting the loss of Bryce Huff. So whether you're talking about Michael Clemens taking a step forward, Jermaine Johnson may be filling that role, I'm not exactly sure, but that is the larger hole now to fill in this Jets defense.
Yeah, Tony, the GM, chimes in and says teams with good O-lines might be able to run up the middle on the Jets defense. Now, Jermaine Johnson's still a good run defending player. Quinnen Williams is a good run defending player. But if you're looking for a weakness on this Jets defense, I think it would be their defense on the run. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be like a bottom 3 unit, but I think they're just going to be like average at that. And yeah, I think some weeks they will struggle a little bit, and it will be tougher for them. But with the way that the league is going and it being more of a passing league, I think the Jets are kind of saying we're okay with, I mean, in a perfect world, you're elite at everything, but that's very, very hard to do and build a roster that way in the salary cap era. But I think they're kind of willing to be a little bit weaker, if you will, at defending the run if it means more for them, with their cornerback room or their pass rushers getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to kind of pick your strengths and your weaknesses. Oftentimes when you're building an NFL roster, you can't excel in every facet of the game. And I think that in the modern NFL, you'd rather have a dominant pass rush than a dominant run defense because it is a passing league. And it's so important that your pass rushers are productive because that in turn helps your defensive backfield as well. I mean, the cornerbacks can do their job only for so long, right? If you're playing man coverage, you can only cover one guy for X amount of seconds. The pass rush needs to get home and get the ball out of the quarterback's hands. So I think that prioritizing the pass rush over the run defense is just the way to go in this modern NFL. And I think that the Jets do have a really good pass rush on paper. And again, we have to see what it looks like during the season. We have to see what Hassan Reddick is playing like. He is entering his 30s, and there is this dispute about his contract, which will loom large for the rest of the summer. But how he performs this season will ultimately kind of dictate how good of a pass rushing unit the Jets have. And since they are kind of going all in on being a pass rushing defensive line, maybe more so than a run defending defensive line, it's going to be really important for him to elevate his play and continue to play at a high level into his 30s. And I also think that with this Jets secondary being so solid, I mean, like so talented, one of the best in the league, that in turn helps the pass rush in many ways.
Absolutely. Going to be looking forward to seeing that in season. First State Jets is hanging with us too. Says tiers are better analysis than straight lists. I tend to agree with that. I think it's hard to split hairs here, but as I kind of mentioned at the top, in my opinion, at least, I think, nope, not the one that I wanted. Here we go. I would say the Eagles, 49ers, and Jets are in like that elite tier. Do you have a preference on the order of how you would rank them? Like, as much as I talked about on paper, I think the Jets defensive line got worse. I think you can make that same case for the 49ers, who lost Eric Armstead, and for the Philadelphia Eagles, with having 2 younger guys in Jordan Davis and Nolan Smith have to step up into bigger roles after losing some veterans.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a strong opinion on the preference of these 3 units. I mean, if I had to pick one, I guess the Eagles adding in Bryce Huff might make them the best to me, but they did lose Hassan Reddick. I don't know. Every team in that cluster kind of lost talent and regained different talent, and now it's all projection. Like, we'll see how it pans out for each of them. I think that at least one of these units is going to maintain its prominence up near the top of the league. Probably at least one of them is going to have a little bit of a fall off based on the roster changes that just occurred. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But putting the Jets at number 1, I really don't have an issue with it. I think that Quinnen Williams is a completely elite talent. I think that Hassan Reddick also can be that. And Jermaine Johnson, I have him in one of my dynasty leagues. That's an IDP league. And he put in work for me last year. Him and Bryce Huff. I actually had both of them. And they put in a lot of work. And I'm expecting and hoping that Jermaine Johnson can continue to play at a high level, maybe increase his productivity so I can stack up more wins in my dynasty league.
There you go. I love that for you. Jermaine Johnson, I thought, had a really impressive year 2 in a much bigger role. And the Jets are really hoping that Will McDonald does the same thing. And McDonald was so interesting last year with with where he was selected 15th overall. I think fans were disappointed to only see him play like I believe it was 19% of defensive snaps, which is just an absurdly low number. But in the limited role that we saw him in last year, he was productive. He had 3 sacks, and I know that's not jumping off the page for anyone, especially a first round pick. But there were a ton of guys in front of him. If he's playing closer to 50% of snaps, I think the Jets have, relatively high expectations for him this year. And I think not that, the line as a whole is contingent on Will McDonald, but them sticking in that elite tier. I think if Will McDonald becomes someone who's, playing 50% of snaps and, giving you 8+ sacks a season and a ton of pressure this year, then I think that would be really huge for them as well.
It certainly would be. And I think that's really kind of, like I said, it's a lot of projection when you're looking at these defensive lines on paper in the summer, but you don't really know what you have yet with Will McDonald. He hasn't received that full slate of playing time just said. And if he does take that step forward, then on paper, this team looks like one thing, but then he takes that step forward and it looks like another. So it really is important to kind of wait and see with some of these defensive units and defensive lines. And I think that Will McDonald, he was taken in the first round for a reason. There is some talent there. I know Jets fans didn't want him in the first round. Many people didn't view him as a first round talent, but someone in the league on the New York Jets front office viewed him as a first round talent. And to their credit, as we've said many times on the show, if there's one kind of part of the game that they scout well and develop well, it's on the defensive side of the ball and it's on the defensive line as well. So Will McDonald probably has more talent than what meets the eye for a lot of Jets fans. And if he does take that step forward and develop in a pretty tremendous way this season, then yeah, we're talking about this Jets defensive line not being one of the best, but maybe being the best in football, especially if their young players rise to the occasion and continue to take that step forward.
Absolutely. Peter is hanging out with us from the beautiful Hudson Valley. He says, hey, fellas, midweek madness. Yes, hop it in for a midweek episode because at this time tomorrow, I'll be signing the next 30 years of my life away. That's what's happening tomorrow. I'm closing on my house. So very, very excited, but also very, very nervous as well, because that's a big purchase and big life event there.
For sure. But many congratulations to you and your family for that big accomplishment.
Thank you, man. Much appreciated. First State Jets, good transition. He says Giants defensive line could be sneaky good and then stacked a lot of talent there. I think both Anthony and I agree with you, but apparently PFF does not. PFF does not. They rank them 18th in the league. They say Dexter Lawrence is a unique player, winning at a greater rate and with more volume than other nose tackles in the game. Adding Brian Burns in the offseason gives the Giants a much better threat on the edge. And now the team needs Kayvon to take a step forward, essentially. I think this is way too low. The Giants should be closer to the top 10 here, I think.
I agree with you. I think the Giants defensive line is the strength of their team right now on paper. And yeah, maybe some of it is projection because we are hoping that Kayvon Thibodeau continues to take those steps forward. He did take a step forward last year, 11.5 sacks, but Sam Monson of PFF does make a good point. Only 43 pressures. He was a little bit of a disappearing act last season. He does need to become more consistent, and this is where projection comes into play. You would assume that having Brian Burns on one side of the line and Kayvon on the other side of the line means more one-on-one pass rushing opportunities for each of them and hopefully more production for each of those players, especially when you have Dexter Lawrence clogging up so much attention in the middle of the defensive line. The edges should be open this year. You should see more from Kayvon, and you should see a lot from Brian Burns. And on top of that, not even mentioned in the article, Azeez Ojulari was a PFF darling at one point. For some reason, they've kind of fallen off of him. I haven't totally fallen off of him. In fact, I think that now moving him down the line into that third pass rushing role makes him a better player. He's going to be playing less, but doing more in those reps. He's going to be on the field just for pass rushing purposes now. He's not going to be asked to run defend and be this more complete player that he simply just hasn't become. And injuries have played a large part in kind of the fall off of Azeez Ojulari through the first 2 seasons of his career. But again, playing in a diminished role, he should stay healthier and he should be more productive when he is on the field. And then compounding on top of all of that I just mentioned, it's a different defensive scheme. It's no longer catering towards defensive backs creating the pressure. Now it's going to ask the pass rushers to straight up pass rush. We're not going to see Kayvon Thibodeau drop back into coverage 85 times. At least I really hope not. That's not expected to be the plan. And we are going to see Burns and Thibodeau pass rush, not create different stunts and twists on the defensive line to open things up for blitzing linebackers and safeties. They're going to be asked to just get after the quarterback on a consistent basis. And that's going to lead to, I think, a huge breakout from all of those Giants defensive linemen, where I thought they were really held back by the Wink Martindale defense. It had its strengths, and I praised it many times, but it had its weaknesses, and this was the weakness. It didn't allow the pass rushers to properly pass rush. So now with this defensive line, again, the 18th ranking is too low, but I get that it is some projection here. But looking at all of these different factors, this can absolutely be a top 10 unit in the NFL. And if these guys take that step forward, it could go even higher.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned Ojulari. They brought in, Boogie Basham as well from Buffalo, as maybe someone who they still view as, could take a little bit of a step here. Because he was a second round pick, if I remember correctly, from Buffalo. Yeah, in the 2021 draft, 61st overall. So maybe they, think that there's more in the tank. I know he didn't do a ton last year with the Giants, but as you mentioned too, a new system I think is going to be really important for these guys, and specifically for the defensive line. Like, not even just the defense as a whole, but I think this is a more friendly scheme for Kayvon Thibodeau and for Brian Burns, because as we've discussed, like, Thibodeau, his first 2 years in the league, was dropping back into coverage at times because of the scheme that they were running, which I don't think is wise. I don't think that's using him to his strength and fullest potential. So I think we see his pass rush numbers increase dramatically this year.
I agree with you. I think that he was really severely held back by that Wink Martindale defense. And again, I've praised it. It did a lot of things well. The Giants finished with the tied for best turnover differential in the NFL. They forced tied for the best most turnovers in the league with the Baltimore Ravens, which is funny enough. That's where Wink Martindale came from, because that's what those defenses do really well. They create pressure on the quarterback. They put defensive backs in the right place at the right time, and they force turnovers. That defensive scheme is great at doing that. But in terms of creating pass rushing productivity from the individual pass rushers, it's not so good. There is a reason why Kayvon Thibodeau last season at 11.5 sacks is the first pass rusher ever in a Wink Martindale defense to cross double-digit sack totals. So because of that, you have to look at all of the other factors that go into Kayvon Thibodeau and his potential breakout this season and realize that, yes, he broke out last year, but he also was held back severely by the scheme that he was playing in. And now in a more simplified defense, zone coverage, rush the passer kind of defense, you can absolutely see a huge boom from Kayvon Thibodeau this upcoming season. And we didn't even talk about Dexter Lawrence too much yet, who's just going to continue to be an absolute stonewall in the middle of the defensive line, both against the run and as a pass rusher. Nobody quite rushes the passer like Dexter Lawrence from that zero position, standing over the center and just getting into the face of the quarterback. He's the best at it, in my opinion. I know you guys might have an argument for Quinnen Williams, but in terms of playing the zero right over the center, no one's better than Dexter Lawrence. He's an incredible nose tackle talent, and on both sides of the game, pass rushing and run defending, you just can't beat Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, and First State Jet says that Lawrence is a monster. I totally agree. I think we're very spoiled here in New York, where we have both, two very young and really impressive interior players in Dexter Lawrence and Quinnen Williams. I know both those guys are going to get compared a ton because they play in the same city. They just got paid at the same time, same draft class too, if I'm not mistaken, right? Dexter Lawrence was 2019 also.
Yep.
Okay, there you go. So that's another thing on top of it too. But I wish we didn't have to live in that world where it's like, oh, you got to compare the two against each other. And I wish we could just enjoy the talent that they both have, because to me, like, we talked again earlier on in the show about doing the tiers and the tier rankings with the defensive line. To me, but Lawrence and Quinnen Williams are in that elite tier and two of the top 3 interior defensive linemen, if you want to throw Chris Jones or someone else in there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think Chris Jones is probably up there in that kind of trio with those two, but then it's Dexter Lawrence and Quinnen Williams as well. I think that you can make the case for any of those 3 being the best or within that top 3. I will say, though, behind Dexter Lawrence is the cause for concern with this Giants defensive line, which is why I was confused with the ranking, because the rankings didn't even mention that in the explanation for the Giants being at number 18. I don't think I read anything about there's nothing in there about a lack of depth behind Dexter Lawrence. And that's the only real cause for concern that I have with this unit is you've got a great edge rusher in Kayvon. You've got a great edge rusher in Burns, another one who could be pretty productive for you in Azeez Ojulari. And then you have Dexter Lawrence in the middle. But if you're playing a 4-3, who's your other interior defensive lineman? I'm not exactly sure. The Giants have a few guys competing for that position. Jordan Riley, a couple undrafted free agents who they also signed this offseason. Raheem Nunez-Roche's Nacho. He's a veteran that maybe gets the starting job, but there isn't a very solid starter lining up next to Dexter Lawrence on the interior of this defensive line. And that's where my cause for concern comes from. It's not a concern about how productive will Kayvon or Burns or Dexter Lawrence be, which again seems to be Sam Monson's concern in this article. Mine is depth. I think that there's depth lacking on the interior, but the starting positions look great to me. And I think that this unit, the ceiling is really high. The floor might be a little bit lower though, just because of the depth on the interior.
Peter says the Giants D-line would dominate their own offensive line and many other teams in the league. I don't know if that's like a backhanded compliment or what, but I think Peter is right to say that. And I think at many times this year, we're going to see the Giants defensive line take games over.
I think we'll see that quite a few times. And I definitely think throughout training camp towards the end of next month, we'll see this defensive line get the better of the offensive line on probably every single practice.
Oh, and we saw that last year with the Jets too. Like that's a fairly common thing. And I agree. I think the Giants defense are going to win a lot of days there. Johnny Boy is hanging out with us now. He says, we want all the noise, want people to continue sleeping on the Jets. That this might also be a good transition, Anthony, into our next topic here. Cause I don't know if you saw the Pro Football Talk power rankings, but I don't know what's going on over here at with Mike Florio at Pro Football Talk, but not the best.
Yeah, Jets not coming in too high. I'm not really sure what Florio's reasoning is. Number 25 is shown on the screen. Giants at 28. So the fact that the Jets and Giants are that close is pretty shocking in and of its own right. But yeah, I'm not sure what the logic is with the Jets being that low. I really think that on paper, this is one of the best rosters in the NFL, arguably top 3. So for them to be that low is just pretty insane to me.
It is insane. It's not surprising, unfortunately, from where it's coming from. PFT and Mike Florio in particular are very anti Aaron Rodgers, which is why I included Aaron Rodgers on the graphic. And look, I get it. Rodgers is an incredibly polarizing guy. I understand even like the on the field and hey, like this, he's a 40-year-old quarterback coming off an injury. We don't know what he is, but even still, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I've said it so many times on this show or on my channel. They won 7 games last year with Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and Tim Boyle starting for them essentially the entire way, except for 4 snaps. If Aaron Rodgers is just average, middle of the road, okay starting quarterback, I don't see how this team isn't a playoff team. And I don't know. Again, if you want to put Buffalo or Miami ahead of them, that's fine. But some of these other teams, I don't like. How the hell are the Denver Broncos ahead of the Jets? That's absurd.
That is absurd. I mean, even the Broncos being ahead of the Giants, I think, is arguably absurd. I think the Broncos have one of the worst rosters in football. They're terrible. Them being at 22 makes them like a team that could push into the postseason by certain rankings. I mean, you got 14 teams in the playoffs. 22 is kind of in that lower cluster. I don't really understand that. First Day Jets actually just commented it. Sean Payton is loved by the media. Never understood this one. I'm going to go on a miniature tangent here. Yeah. Sean Payton should not be allowed to coach in the NFL. I think that what he did in Bountygate, the 1-year suspension was not enough. I think it's utterly ridiculous how much he is loved by the media and the fact that he's allowed to be an NFL coach. Bountygate almost put the entire integrity of the NFL at risk. He should have received a harsher punishment than the 1-year ban. I'm going to digress off of that, though, and just say that these rankings are all over the place. The Saints being in front of the Jets is a joke. I think that there are a few teams that you could argue being in front of a lot of these teams, because really the Jets, look at their roster on paper. Whether you think Aaron Rodgers is going to be a superstar this year or not, take Aaron Rodgers out of the equation. They still won 7 games last year, like you said, with Zach Wilson. Now, if Aaron Rodgers is even average to below, which I think he's going to be above, but if he's average to below, at the very least, you're talking about a top 15 team in football.
Yeah. You saw Tyrod Taylor a lot the last couple of years, and specifically last year with the Giants. Let's even play this game. If Tyrod Taylor started all 17 games for the Jets last year, what do you think their record is? They have to be better than 7-10, no?
Gotta be. Absolutely.
Yeah, so like I don't get how they are this, because even like if Rodgers gets hurt again 4 plays in, God forbid, and you have to go to Tyrod for the rest of the year, can they not somehow find a way to 10 wins? I'm not saying they have the same Super Bowl aspirations, but can they not find themselves to a wild card spot and be a top 15 team? Again, I get it. Like there's a lot of good teams at the top. That top 6, I don't think the Jets are touching. The Bucks at 9 also feels very strange to me. That feels high for them. Do you agree?
Definitely. I guess he's pretty high on Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I love Baker as much as the next guy, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being number 9 with all of the issues on their roster is pretty shocking.
What about the Chargers? I know Harbaugh is brought in, but what the hell are the Chargers? What have they done to be a top 15 team in the league?
No idea. And also the Cowboys at 16 and the Eagles at 5. That's I mean, listen, my hatred for the Eagles is well documented, but even putting that aside, them being a top 5 team in the NFL after what happened to them towards the end of last season, that is ridiculous. And the Cowboys, I don't like the Cowboys very much. I'm a Giants fan. Cowboys are one of the best teams in football. Look at that roster and look at the success that they've had in recent years. I understand they haven't had the postseason success that they desire, but regular season success, if you're going by power rankings, how is that not a top 10 team in football?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very valid one. I also see the Bears at 17. A lot of people are buying a lot of Bears stock right now, with them being getting Caleb Williams and having a good draft. And offseason just in general. Was kind of curious your thoughts on if you're buying your Bears stock right now, or if you're selling that off.
I'm buying the Bears stock. I'm pretty high on the Bears. I don't think that I'm so high on them I'd have them ahead of the Jets. I think that they're probably better suited around 20, and obviously, like I said, Jets in the top 10. But I am buying the Bears because I think that what we could see from them in the next 3 to 5 years could be really special. But for this season, fringe playoff team, maybe. But again, it's a lot of projection there with Caleb Williams. It's pretty much everybody expecting him to step in and be an immediate superstar. Even the top quarterback prospects of all time, if you're talking Peyton, if you're talking Luck, whoever you want to talk about, Joe Burrow even, a lot of those guys step into the league and, yes, do become the superstars that they're expected to be. A lot of them don't, but even the ones that become the superstars they're expected to be probably don't have that much success as rookies. Usually takes a year or two. So everyone expecting Caleb Williams to immediately make the Bears a playoff team, probably buying into the hype a little bit too much. So I'm buying the Bears stock, but it's like future stock. I'm not expecting them to be that dominant team this season.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Because the NFC is pretty weak, so I think they have a chance to be a wild card team. I think Packers win that division. I don't think it's really particularly close either, but I think the Bears can absolutely compete for a playoff spot. 17's probably fair. Like I would say a touch high, but it's fair. I'm not going nuts over them there, but like that would just be another team in front. Again, I'm just looking at all the teams in front of the Jets, and I just don't get that one. There's a lot that I don't get, but First State Jets brings up an interesting point about Dan Campbell. Was literally the direct cause of 3 losses last year. Media loves him. Let's see him be a good coach when the Goff roller coaster hits bottom and gets non-elite quarterback play. What's your take on the Lions and Dan Campbell?
I think that's a pretty interesting and controversial one right there. Dan Campbell, you could argue, is the reason for the success of the Lions. You can also argue he is the reason for some of those losses, like First State Jets is arguing right now. I think he makes a really good point. The media does love Dan Campbell. He kind of somehow, some way took that character that he created for himself in the media and ran with it successfully. We've seen coaches do that in the past, and oftentimes they crash and burn. I think that really relevant comparison would be Giants Joe Judge. Those two coaches were hired the same offseason. They had very similar introductory press conferences. One of them has had a lot of success. One of them is one of the worst head coaches ever. So you could see that kind of mentality and character that Campbell is building. It's working for him right now, but it does kind of live in the back of my mind. How much longer can this work for? How much longer can the players coach keep the players together? Because the roster changes year to year. Sometimes the players that come in are not the same as the players who are leaving. And sometimes the player coach doesn't resonate as well with the roster that gets overturned after a single offseason. So I think that in the back of my head, I'll always have some sort of concern with Dan Campbell, but it's really just I have to believe in him until he proves otherwise that I can't.
Yeah, that is fair. I think Dan Campbell is, I would even classify him as a good coach. I think maybe a little overhyped. And I get that, but that Lions team is really good. The players love playing for him. It's just a matter of, as you said, like how long does that run work? It feels like the player coaches, like they don't really have a super long shelf life. A great example, Rex Ryan with the Jets. His first 2 years, they were phenomenal. They go to AFC championship games, take a step back in the third year. They're just a 500 team. And then they pretty much stunk the rest of his tenure. They held on to him for a while because he was so well liked. He ended up coaching 6 years, but once the roster begins to turn over and once there's change, that's kind of when things tend to go awry. So it'd be interesting to see how he adjusts. I think the Lions thrive off his aggressive nature, and you're just going to have to kind of live with, when it backfires or it doesn't work, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. You have to live and die by Dan Campbell. And at some point, the Lions might die by Dan Campbell, and Dan Campbell might lose his job because of it. But right now, they're living on him, and they're finding way more success than my Giants. So how much hating on Dan Campbell can I really do? Plus, he is a former Giant. So I guess I am inherently supposed to love him. But I really wish that the Giants had a head coach that everybody rallied around and just bought wins for, because Brian Daboll had that effect in year one, I think. I mean, it looked like it, especially week one. He made the gutsy call to go for 2 and beat the Titans. And I think a lot of those aggressive, ballsy decisions from Daboll paid off throughout the regular season and even into that first week of the postseason. But year 2, it looked like a completely different team under Brian Daboll, and he looked like a completely different coach. So it is tough to evaluate head coaches year to year. And I've got my question marks not only about Dan Campbell, but also about Robert Saleh and Brian Daboll. So it should be an interesting 2024 season.
You mentioned it, so I wanted to pull up this comment. Saleh burps in a meeting, media kills him for 2 weeks. Listen, I think Dan Campbell has proven to be a better coach than Robert Saleh for now. And I think for me, like the concerns and the questions about Saleh is fair. I do think he gets a little bit overhated because he's dealt with the simply horrendous quarterback situation his first 3 years. Like, I'm not saying he's a great coach. I just don't think we know the answer until we see him with Rodgers this year. So that's why I'm holding out like my full judgment on him.
And that's totally valid. I just think that too often NFL teams find and make excuses for coaches and players. Like, I think that excuse for Saleh, listen, he did a great job managing that storm last year, and you can probably blame Joe Douglas more than Saleh for the fact that the Jets didn't have a solid backup quarterback. That's absolutely true. But I think that there have been opportunities in the past where Saleh has received a lot of slack that maybe other guys wouldn't get the same amount of slack. And those other guys are probably with better organizations. And that's really what it comes down to, is being cutthroat. And again, I think the same logic applies to Daniel Jones. Has gotten every single excuse in the book. And now we're entering year 6, hoping for the patented year 6 leap that we have to mention at least once every episode on Big Apple Blitz. But I think that oftentimes NFL teams fall in love with the person and not necessarily in their performance in their job. And it can lead to some pretty scary situations long term.
Let's get into our final topic of the day here, which is a Giants youth movement in the secondary. I was surprised to see the average age when you texted me this morning when we were going over topics.
Yeah, of the starting 5, the average age is 22.8 years old. You've got Deonte Banks entering his 2nd season. Opposite him, Cordell Flott going into year 3. In the slot, the rookie Andrew Phillips. And on the back end, rookie Tyler Nubin. And 3rd-year player, I think maybe 4th-year player, Jason Pinnock. So all of those 5 starters, very, very young. They do have some depth pieces in there who are a little bit older, like Jalen Mills, who they signed this offseason. I think he's 31, but I don't expect him to see the field a whole ton. And in the cornerback room, there really isn't any depth. And so it's a cause for concern and a cause for optimism. It really creates this very scary dynamic for this Giants defense that makes it so boom or bust. Like if all of these young guys play well, they take those steps forward, they develop properly. Yeah, we're talking about long term. The Giants could have an elite secondary for years to come. But we're also talking about severe growing pains potentially this year. And you can't always expect every single young player that you have to pan out. And Cordell Flott is being asked to do a lot this year, moving to a starting outside job when he's been playing as a rotational slot guy for 2 years. So there is a lot of cause for concern and excitement in this Giants secondary. I think that the way that the Giants built this unit, again, it could pay off and it could be a boom, or they could get burnt by their inexperience and overabundance of youth, and they could really bust.
I'm sorry to cut you off and completely change the course, but we have some
Breaking news.
We have some Tommy DeVito breaking news. I don't know if you've seen this from Adam Schefter. Ready? Tommy DeVito's agent, Sean Stiletto, met with the Pope. He gifted the Pope a custom football with the Pope's coat of arms emblem. This might be my favorite picture in a long time. This is just absolutely tremendous, and could not go another second on the show without bringing up Tommy DeVito and his agent, Sean Stiletto.
That's just incredible. I don't even the madness of Tommy DeVito and his agent has officially reached new incredible heights. I'm loving this. I'm loving every piece of information that we get on Sean Stiletto, on Tommy DeVito. This is just another amazing development and another win for the DeVito cult.
The only thing that would make this better is if Tommy was sitting next to Sean Stiletto in this. Like, if I don't know who this priest is, but if Tommy DeVito was sitting here and it was Sean Stiletto, like, that would be made into a painting and put in every Italian New Jersey deli in like 5 minutes.
100%. I really wish Tommy DeVito made his way over to the Pope. A picture of Tommy DeVito shaking the Pope's hands. I mean, what could be more Italian than that?
Yeah, I think you'd have to make that your profile picture or something.
Definitely at least my header on Twitter for sure.
So good. So again, sorry to cut you off, but we had to pull that up and discuss. We could not pass up the opportunity to get some Tommy DeVito talk on the official Tommy DeVito bandwagon podcast here.
I'll never complain about Tommy DeVito talk. In fact, I think that we could even tie it into this topic of the Giants' youthful secondary. More opportunities for Tommy DeVito to pick apart a young and inexperienced secondary throughout training camp and earn his rightful place as QB1 on the Giants roster.
I like that. But for the Giants youth in the secondary, I guess my question for you is that a concern for you, with that being a younger group and a younger core and not having that veteran in the mix really with them?
It's a huge cause for concern. Like I said, it's boom or bust with the secondary. Like, these young players could pan out. They could be excellent. I think that Deonte Banks is going to be an elite player at some point in his career. I think that Tyler Nubin has that potential as well. But overall, there is a real lack of experience here. And when the going gets tough and when the Giants have to face off against a lot of really talented receiving cores, you do have to wonder, can this young secondary hold up? I think that this could be one of the biggest strengths of this team, or it could be their complete undoing this season.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I will say, though, on the positive side, corner is one of those positions where it doesn't always age gracefully. Usually when you reach 30 years old, that the fall off can come quickly. Unfortunately, a good example of that is Darrelle Revis in 2016. Absolutely fell off a cliff. And like, sometimes when it goes, it just goes. And them being a young group, it may lead to some mistakes, but in a year where the Giants are probably not going to be playoff contenders, having the youth and having them learn on the job might actually be better for them in the long run.
Yeah, and that's the argument that I see a lot of Giants fans make, especially when we talk about the secondary on Fireside Giants, or when I bring it up on Twitter. A lot of them mention this isn't going to be a Super Bowl caliber team this year. It's best to let these guys develop and learn through playing on the football field. And I agree with that. But at the same time, this is a coaching staff that I feel like has their backs against the wall. I feel like Brian Daboll has to buy himself some wins this year, and banking on this young secondary with a brand new defensive coordinator to pan out and lead this defense, it's a tough ask, and it really could be the undoing of this team. Like, if this secondary completely implodes upon itself, it's going to be very easy for those same Giants fans who said, let these kids develop, to point to the coaching staff and say, oh my God, you guys aren't developing this team. You got to go. And once the Giants fans turn on the head coach, it's not short after that the owner feels that pressure and makes the firing. We've seen that many times. That's New York sports. That's the nature of it. And for the Giants in particular, John Mara has kind of expressed his willingness to move on from a coach sooner rather than later, which is probably a good thing. However, with Brian Daboll trying to continue in his place and hold his job here, banking on this young secondary is, again, a major cause for concern and really could be the undoing of this team.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk. And I guess you kind of have to weigh. From Daboll's side, there might be pressure for him to win and perform and get back to the playoffs. But also, like, you look at some areas of this Giants roster, and it kind of feels like they're in a transition, especially with their quarterback situation for this year. So I'm interested to see how it plays out with the owner and John Maurer, and how much he leans into the pressure that the fans put on him to either make a change, or if he sticks with Daboll. My take on it. I think they want to hire Bill Belichick.
I think so too. I unfortunately, I do think that is living in the minds of the top brass for the New York Giants. And I think that's got to live in the mind of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll as well. Like, this general manager head coach pairing feels like they're kind of tied to the hip. And if you're getting rid of one, you're probably getting rid of both. And if you're getting rid of both, that so clearly paves the way for Bill Belichick to step in and be the GM and head coach for a new organization, and in particular, an organization that he's been with before, won Super Bowls with, and holds him in the highest regard. I mean, the Giants probably don't appreciate anyone in the football world more than Bill Belichick, outside of maybe Eli Manning. That might be the one guy who's still involved with football that they view in a higher regard. But really, Bill Belichick, the love affair there is so intense between Belichick's love for the Giants and the Giants' love for him. It feels like it's inevitable that eventually he will end up here in some way at some point. Although I think that if Brian Daboll finds his way back into the postseason this year, we'll never have to talk about Bill Belichick being an option again.
Donna does not agree. She says we do not sign Bill Belichick. You two sound like morons.
And listen, we might sound like morons now, but I've sounded like a moron for the Giants in the past, and then they've gone ahead and done some moronic things.
Yeah,
and we've seen a lot of failures from this Giants team.
I was going to say, I don't think either of us are advocating for it to happen. I just think we see that the Giants love Belichick, and Belichick's on the sidelines for this year, shacking up with 24-year-olds if he wants to get back into the league. I'm just saying, John Mara, he's always wanted that Giants coaching job, I think, anyway.
He has, and that's not even a question. Like, if you read through what Belichick has said in the past and what the Giants have said of him in the past, there has always been a mutual interest there. I don't think it's going to happen necessarily. I don't want to see it happen, so I don't think that we're idiots or morons for talking about it. I just think that it is a possibility that's going to live in the back of the minds of the Giants ownership if the going gets tough for Brian Daboll this year. But again, I think that Brian Daboll is a good coach, and I'm confident in him going into the season, and I think that he is banking on some risks here, but that's kind of what made Brian Daboll such a good coach in his first season and why he won Coach of the Year. He took those risks and he found a way to make them pay off. So taking this risk on the secondary to tie it back into that, if it pays off the way that he expects it to, then he will be looked at as one of the best coaches in football once again, like he was 2 seasons ago. So it's risky, and if the risks don't pay off, there is a domino effect that could see Belichick be the head coach for this team next year. But I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. I do trust and believe in Brian Daboll, and I think that he got away from being risky and being aggressive last season, and that's why the Giants weren't as successful. If he gets back to being aggressive and taking those risks this season, like he's doing with this secondary, and like he's probably doing with this offensive line, which I think is a risk as well, if these risks pay off, we will be talking about Brian Daboll once again contending for Coach of the Year rather than being on the hot seat.
How about Carter Coughlin? Philip wants to know if you think he will see more time this year.
I think that Carter Coughlin has pretty firmly settled into his role as a core special teamer. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. He was a very late round draft pick. And yeah, there were some expectations at one point that he could become a starter in the Giants defense, maybe at linebacker. And then it was kind of as edge rusher. a little bit of a mix of the both, but he's got a place on this roster. He will see his playing time on special teams, but it is going to require injuries on the defensive side of the ball for him to see significant playing time there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. It makes sense kind of just to have him in that special teams role. 7th round pick from 2020. If you're getting your late day 3 guys to be core special teamers, I think that's a win. NYC TV NYC says, but you want to bank on Evan Neal, I'm assuming, can play guard. Your rebuttal.
I'm not banking on that. I'm not banking on Evan Neal at all. Like I've said many times, I think on this show and definitely on Fireside Giants, my expectations for Neal are very low. Like I don't think that they're going to be a great team this year. I don't think that Evan Neal is going to take this big step forward. I think that if he does, it has a tremendous effect on this team, and this team can be a whole lot better if he elevates his play and becomes at least average. However, I'm not expecting him to become a good player at this point because I've bought into the year 3 jumps for players before, and I just get disappointed. So I'm not banking on Evan Neal to become a great tackle. I'm not banking on him to be a great guard. I think that the path for him to become an average player is easier at guard than it is at tackle at this point. So moving him to guard might be the best way to save his career, but I don't think that this career is necessarily going to be quickly turned around just by moving him to guard. And so I'm not banking on anybody named Evan Neal to save this New York Giants offensive line.
No, I think, in my opinion on Evan Neal, I think his only chance at redemption at this point is at guard. I think we've seen enough at tackle to see that he really can't play that position at the NFL level. Kicking him inside to guard is kind of like a last resort thing. And if you have to bench him, then you have to bench him, I guess.
Yeah, and finally, for once, the Giants have enough talent to where if they bench Evan Neal, they're probably not going to be completely burned. I mean, you could argue that benching Evan Neal would have made them a better team last year because he was so bad for so many of those games. But with this Giants offensive line, they did add some depth. They've got Jermaine Illuminor. They're developing some other guys behind the scenes. So if they do end up benching Evan Neal or they move him to guard, they do have candidates to fill into that tackle role and probably play better than Evan Neal ever has in that position. So it'll be interesting to see what the offensive line looks like week 1 versus week 17. I think that's going to be a fun storyline to follow throughout the year if that offensive line remains the same. A lot of different configurations in that starting 5 this past season. A lot of that did have to do with injuries, though. But Evan Neal, I mean, he's got to do or die this year. If he proves to be a decent player this season, maybe he's back for year 4 and 5. If not, he's probably on his way out after his rookie contract expires, maybe even sooner. So a lot of pressure on his shoulders and a lot of pressure on the shoulders of the Giants offensive line to finally step up this year and hopefully allow the quarterback to make some plays, whether that be Daniel Jones or the true QB1 on this team, Tommy DeVito.
Yeah, I love how you stuck that in there at the end. The true QB1, Tommy DeVito. He starts a game this year. I think at least one, I think.
I think so too.
Before we get out of here, I wanted to let you guys know that our next episode will be on Tuesday next week, not Monday. So a little Tuesday edition of Big Apple Blitz coming at you next week, right, Anthony?
Yes, sir. Little special occasion. It'll be my birthday, so we'll be in here doing the show and having some fun.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. We'll have the Anthony Rivardo birthday bash on Tuesday. That'll be fun. Make sure to subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. We appreciate you hanging with us. Follow along Anthony's Giants work on Fireside Giants. My stuff you can find on Talking Jets or Matt O'Leary NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.